John Rhett Matthews slammed his fist against the wooden table, rattling the half-empty coffee cups and medical bills. His deep brown eyes burned with frustration as he leaned forward, his prosthetic leg tapping against the floor. The dimly lit Veterans Hall in South Carolina smelled of old cigars, cheap whiskey, and decades of broken promises. "This ain't right," Red growled. "This ain't right at all." The room fell silent. The men sitting around him, all black, all disabled veterans from different wars, looked at each other. Some were old, their faces lined with time and pain. Some were young, their eyes still burning with the ghosts of war. But they all shared the same problem. America had forgotten them. Across the room, Luther Doct Hayes, a Vietnam War medic with only one arm, nodded. His gray beard twitched as he took a deep breath. "I've been saying this for years, Red. We gave our blood, our limbs, our damn souls for this country, and they still treat us like we ain't worth a damn. White veterans get the best hospitals, the best benefits," muttered Jeremiah J. Carter, a Marine who lost his sight in Iraq. "Meanwhile, we're over here begging for scraps." "Scraps? Hell, we ain't even getting that," Red shot back. Everyone in the room knew it was true. They had compared notes. White veterans, some with the exact same injuries, got better healthcare, faster appointments, and higher disability checks. But when black veterans asked for the same, there were always delays, always excuses. "I checked with my old buddy, Frank, white boy I served with in Afghanistan," said Malik Thompson, a Gulf War vet with a missing leg. "He got approved for full benefits in 3 months. Took me 2 damn years." The air grew thick with anger. It wasn't new anger. It was old, built over decades, passed down from their fathers and grandfathers who had fought in wars and come home to a country that barely acknowledged them. Then a voice from the back spoke. "We need to fight back." Everyone turned to look at Thomas Tank Johnson, a towering man in a wheelchair. He had lost both legs in Desert Storm, but what he lost in limbs he made up for in spirit. "Tank, fight back how?" Jay asked, rubbing his blind eyes. "We tried the petitions. We tried letters to congressmen. Ain't nobody listening. Tank rolled his chair forward. "Then we make 'em listen." A heavy silence filled the room. Red narrowed his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" Tank smiled, slow and knowing. "I'm suggesting we take the fight straight to 'em. The media. The politicians. The whole damn system." Doc folded his arms. "You talking protests?" "I'm talking war," Tank said. "Not with guns. With the truth. We expose 'em. We make sure the world sees what they're doing to us." The men looked at each other. War was all they had ever known. But this war, this was different. This was personal. And this time they refused to lose. A week later the group gathered again, but this time they weren't just talking. They had a plan. Tank had reached out to an old friend, Lisa Montgomery, an investigative journalist known for exposing government scandals. She had covered veteran issues before, but nothing like this. The Veterans Hall in Charleston, South Carolina, was more than just a meeting place. It was their war room. The peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights bore witness to years of frustration, broken promises, and brotherhood forged in battle. Tonight, however, the air was different, charged, electric. Tank Johnson sat at the head of the table, his muscular arms resting on the wheels of his chair. His sharp gaze scanned the room. Red Matthews sat to his left, his prosthetic leg tapping impatiently against the floor. Jeremiah J. Carter, blind but listening intently, nodded along with the conversation. Malik Thompson, Luther Doct Hayes, and the rest of the group sat in tense silence, waiting. The door swung open and Lisa Montgomery stepped in. The investigative journalist was dressed in a dark blazer and jeans, a camera bag slung over her shoulder. She had the air of someone who had seen too many lies and was determined to uncover the truth. "You got proof?" Lisa asked, skipping the pleasantries. Red pushed a thick folder across the table. "More than enough." Lisa flipped it open. The room watched as she read, her fingers tracing the edges of medical documents, VA correspondence, and testimony after testimony of black veterans being denied the same care that white veterans received. "This is worse than I thought," she muttered. She looked up. "If I run this story, it's going to blow up. But you need to be ready. The government won't sit back and take this quietly." Tank leaned forward. "We ain't scared." Lisa's eyes flickered to the scars on his face, to Red's missing leg, to Jay's empty gaze. She believed him. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning. Lisa interviewed each veteran, capturing their personal experiences on camera. Red recounted how his VA disability claim had been delayed for over a year, while a white veteran with the same injuries had his approved in weeks. Malik shared how he had been sent to an understaffed VA hospital where he waited months for a prosthetic, while his white counterparts got top-tier treatment almost immediately. Jay described the painful 6-month battle just to receive approval for a service dog to help him navigate the world without sight. Each story was worse than the last. "I've seen some messed up things in my career," Lisa admitted. "But this is straight-up systemic racism." Tank rolled his chair forward. "So what do we do?" Lisa's eyes burned with determination. "We go public. You're not just individuals anymore. You're a movement." Lisa's story aired on national television and was published across multiple media outlets. The headline was impossible to ignore. "Black veterans denied proper healthcare, a nation's betrayal." The country exploded in debate. Social media erupted with hashtags like #VeteransDeserveBetter and #BlackVetsMatter. Some people were outraged, demanding immediate investigations into the VA's practices. Others dismissed it, calling it race baiting and accusing the veterans of exaggerating their claims. Then the threats began. Lisa received anonymous phone calls telling her to back off. Tank's home was vandalized, the words liar and traitor spray painted across his garage door. Red started getting rejection letters for job applications he had submitted months ago, ones he had previously been promised interviews for. And then there were the letters. Official ones from the VA, claiming that certain benefits had been reviewed and adjusted. It was clear retaliation. But the worst was yet to come. 3 days after the story aired, Lisa received a cryptic email. "I have information. I can prove they're doing this on purpose. Meet me at the old train station at midnight." The sender was anonymous, but Lisa had a gut feeling this was big. That night, she drove to the abandoned train station on the outskirts of town. The place was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rumble of a passing truck on the highway. A man in a dark hoodie stepped out from the shadows. "You Lisa Montgomery?" "Depends on who's asking," she replied, gripping the pepper spray in her pocket. The man pulled down his hood. He was in his mid-50s, with thinning hair and tired eyes. "My name's Greg Simmons. I worked for the VA for 20 years. I know what's happening and I can prove it." Lisa's heart pounded. "Go on." Simmons glanced around nervously before handing her a flash drive. "It's all in there. Emails. Internal reports. They slow down claims from black veterans on purpose. They assign them to the slowest processors. They deny things automatically, hoping they'll give up. It's been happening for decades." Lisa's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" Simmons sighed. "Because it's wrong. And because I can't live with it anymore." Lisa took the drive. "This changes everything." The next day, Lisa met with the veterans at the hall. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop and pulled up the documents. The evidence was damning. Emails from VA officials instructing employees to prioritize certain applications over others. Internal memos admitting to unofficial quotas limiting how many black veterans could be approved for full benefits each year. Records of systemic delays in hospitals primarily serving black veteran populations. "This is it," Lisa whispered. "This is the smoking gun." Red exhaled slowly. "So what do we do now?" Tank grinned. "We raise hell." Armed with undeniable proof, the veterans organized a protest in front of the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. The turnout was bigger than they had imagined. Hundreds of veterans, black, white, Latino, Asian, stood together demanding change. Signs reading "Equal care for all vets" and "We bled the same" filled the air. The media was everywhere. Then the police showed up. They ordered the crowd to disperse. Tank rolled his wheelchair forward, stopping inches from the nearest officer. "We ain't going nowhere." The tension was thick. Then in the crowd a familiar voice rang out. "I served in Vietnam and I will not be silenced." It was an elderly black man, his chest full of medals, his cane shaking with rage. One by one more veterans stepped forward. Some lifted their prosthetics in the air. Others displayed old wounds. The world was watching. The officers hesitated, then stepped back. The protest continued. And the government had no choice but to listen. Within days, congressional hearings were announced. VA officials were subpoenaed. The president himself addressed the issue, promising reform. But the veterans knew this was just the beginning. "This ain't over," Red said as they watched the news from their old hall. "Not till every last one of us gets what we earned." Tank nodded. "Then we keep fighting." Lisa raised her glass. "To justice." They drank. The battle was far from over. But for the first time they knew they had a chance to win. Red Matthews' phone buzzed in the middle of the night. He groggily reached for it, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. It was Lisa. "Red, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the line. I think someone's following me. His heart pounded as he sat up in bed. Where are you? Driving home. There's been a black SUV behind me for the last 5 miles. Every turn I take, they take it too. Red swung his legs over the side of the bed, his prosthetic clicking as he adjusted it. Lisa, listen to me. Get somewhere public. A gas station, a police station, anywhere with people. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Red cursed under his breath. He immediately dialed back. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. He quickly threw on a jacket and grabbed his keys. As he rushed out of his apartment, he called Tank. Tank, something's wrong. Lisa was being followed, and now she's not answering. Tank didn't hesitate. I'm on it. Where was she last? Headed home. I don't know exactly where she was when she called. Meet me at her place. Red jumped into his truck and sped through the empty streets of Charleston. By the time he got to Lisa's apartment, Tank was already there, his wheelchair parked by the curb. You try her again? Tank asked. 5 times. Nothing. They both turned as a pair of headlights appeared down the road. For a split second they tensed, ready for anything. But it was just a police cruiser. The officer stepped out and approached them. You the ones who know Lisa Montgomery? One of them asked. Red's stomach dropped. Yeah. What happened? The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. We found her car wrecked off Highway 17. It looks like she lost control and hit a tree. Paramedics took her to the hospital. Red felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. She alive? Tank demanded. The officer nodded. She's unconscious but stable. Red clenched his fists. You sure it was an accident? The officer hesitated. There were no skid marks. No sign she tried to brake. Almost like someone ran her off the road. Tank's jaw tightened. Someone wanted her gone. Lisa survived, but she was in a coma. The doctors didn't know when or if she would wake up. The group gathered in the hospital waiting room, tension thick in the air. We all know this wasn't no accident, Malik said. They tried to kill her. Jay, his blind eyes dark with anger, spoke up. First the threats, then the vandalism, now this? They're scared. Red paced the room. Damn right they're scared. We got the truth and they know it. Tank nodded. Then we don't stop. Lisa would want us to keep pushing. But it wasn't just Lisa in danger. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Tank's bank account was mysteriously frozen due to an investigation into fraudulent activity, an investigation he never started. Red got a letter stating his VA benefits were under review due to a clerical error. Jay received a visit from 2 men in suits who claimed to be government auditors, asking about his disability claim. It was clear, someone powerful wanted to shut them up. And they weren't above using fear to do it. The veterans knew they needed more protection, so they decided to go to the press again. Lisa had started the fight, but now they had to finish it. They scheduled a press conference in front of the VA office in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of veterans, black, white, Latino, showed up to stand with them. Signs reading "Veterans deserve equal care," and "We fought for you, now fight for us" filled the air. The cameras rolled as Red stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the crowd, his chest tight with emotion. I lost my leg in Afghanistan, he began. When I came home, I thought the hardest battles were behind me. I was wrong. The crowd murmured in agreement. For years, black veterans have been denied the care they earned. The care they bled for. We have the proof, and now the whole world knows it. And yet, instead of fixing the problem, they're trying to silence us. Shouts of anger rang out. They ran our friend off the road, Tank said, rolling up to the mic. They froze my bank account. They sent men to intimidate us. But we ain't gonna stop. The crowd roared in agreement. Then, something unexpected happened. A man in a suit stepped onto the stage. He was clean-cut, mid-50s, with a confident smirk. He took the microphone from the stand. My name is Senator Richard Callaway, he said, his voice smooth. I want to personally thank these veterans for bringing this issue to light. Red's stomach churned. Callaway was known for his vague promises and empty words. We at the Veterans Administration take these allegations very seriously, Callaway continued. I assure you we will investigate thoroughly. Red narrowed his eyes. Investigate? We gave you proof. Callaway smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. And we will review it carefully. But we must ensure we're not jumping to conclusions. The veterans exploded in anger. They knew what this was. Stall tactics. A way to make the public forget. Red grabbed the mic back. Nah. We ain't waiting for you to review nothing. You've been reviewing us for decades. The time for action is now. The crowd erupted in cheers. Calloway's face darkened. He turned and walked off the stage. Jay leaned over to Red. "That man is dangerous." Red nodded. "I know." That night, as Red was driving home, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Close. Too close. His grip tightened on the wheel. Then the car behind him sped up. Before he could react, it slammed into his bumper. Red's truck spun out of control, careening off the road. He braced for impact as his world turned upside down. When he woke up, he was in a hospital bed. His ribs were bandaged and pain shot through his body with every breath. Tank sat beside him, his face grim. "They tried to kill you, man," he said. Red swallowed hard. "They ain't gonna stop." Tank's expression hardened. "Neither are we. The attacks only made them stronger." Lisa woke up days later, weak but determined. Her first words? "Did you keep fighting?" They had. And their persistence paid off. The public was furious. Congressional hearings were launched. VA officials were forced to testify. The system was exposed, its corruption laid bare. And finally, change began. The streets of Washington, D.C., were alive with a restless energy. The National Mall was flooded with people. Veterans from all branches of the military, activists, families, and supporters who had followed the fight for justice. Tank, Red, Jay, Malik, Doc, and Lisa stood together near the front of the crowd, their hearts pounding as they looked up at the Capitol building. Today was the day. The Equal Veterans Healthcare Act was finally being signed into law. It had taken everything they had, blood, sweat, tears, and the near loss of their lives, but they had done it. The corrupt practices within the VA had been exposed. Congress had been forced to act. There would be no more quiet dismissals, no more lost paperwork, no more delays meant to push black veterans to the back of the line. For the first time in history, the government was legally bound to provide equal health care, benefits, and support to all veterans regardless of race. Red adjusted his prosthetic leg, feeling the weight of the moment. He had imagined this day 1,000 times, but standing here, he felt more exhausted than victorious. Lisa nudged him. "You should smile. You won." He shook his head. "We didn't win. We just stopped losing." Lisa's smile faded and she nodded in understanding. The fight wasn't truly over. It never would be. But today they had made history. A name the nation would never forget. As the president stepped up to the podium, the crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we take a step toward justice. A step toward honoring the sacrifices of all who have worn the uniform, regardless of the color of their skin. This bill was not passed easily, nor without struggle. It is because of the courage and determination of a group of veterans, men and women who fought not only overseas but here at home, that we are here today." The president looked toward them and gestured. Tank Johnson, Red Matthews, Jeremiah J. Carter, Malik Thompson, Luther Doc Hayes, Lisa Montgomery. America owes you a debt it can never repay. Tank, always the most composed of them all, simply nodded. Red exhaled slowly. Jay, who couldn't see the massive crowd, could feel the energy in the air. "We really did it, huh?" "We did," Malik murmured. The president continued. "But we cannot forget the sacrifices made to get here. Some gave more than they should have had to. And so, today I am honored to announce that this bill will bear the name of a man whose dedication to this fight cost him everything. A man who should be here with us today." Red's throat tightened. "We name this law the Luther Hayes Equal Veterans Healthcare Act." A stunned silence filled the air. Then applause thundered across the National Mall. Doc's name. Red turned his head slightly, looking at Tank, who stared ahead, unmoving. Lisa wiped at her eyes, her shoulders trembling. Jay took a deep breath and whispered, "Damn." Luther Doc Hayes had been their friend. Their brother. The quiet, steady force that had kept them together when things got hard. And he was gone. A month before the signing of the bill, Luther had been gunned down. The official police report ruled it a random act of violence, a supposed mugging gone wrong. But they knew better. Doc had been one of the strongest voices in their fight, a relentless advocate who had refused to back down even when the threats started coming. He had called out corrupt officials by name, looked into cameras and dared them to silence him. And someone had. Red had gotten the call late at night. He remembered standing in his living room, Lisa on speakerphone, her voice shaking as she read the news headline. "Veteran advocate shot and killed in South Carolina." His legs had nearly given out. They had been so close to the finish line. So close. But Doc hadn't lived to see it. At the funeral, Red had barely been able to speak. He had stood at the podium, gripping the sides as he looked out over the sea of grieving faces, veterans, friends, family. "He fought for all of us," he had said, his voice hoarse. "And they killed him for it." Lisa had told him later that those words had started a fire in the nation. Public outrage over Doc's death had pushed Congress to move faster than they ever had before. The bill had been signed in record time. But none of it brought Doc back. Now, standing in front of thousands of people, hearing his friend's name immortalized in history, Red felt a mix of pride and sorrow so deep it nearly crushed him. Tank rolled closer and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "He'd be proud," Tank said. Red nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah. I just wish he was here." As the crowd began to disperse, news cameras swarming them for interviews, Red pulled Lisa aside. "This ain't over," he said. She sighed. "I know." Lisa had uncovered more in her investigation than just the discrimination in the VA. The corruption ran deeper than they had ever imagined. "We got the bill passed, but that don't mean the system's fixed," Red continued. "They'll find new ways to cut corners to push us aside. We gotta watch 'em." Lisa nodded. "I've already started digging." Red smirked. "Knew you would." Tank, Malik and Jay joined them. "So what now?" Malik asked. Tank exhaled. "Now, we do what soldiers do. We stand watch." They all looked back at the Capitol building one last time. A battle had been won. But the war for justice was never ending. And they would never stop fighting. For Doc. For every black veteran who had been denied what they earned. For those still waiting for justice. For the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. Because if they didn't, who would? In the weeks following the signing of the Luther Hayes Equal Veterans Healthcare Act, the nation was abuzz with the ripple effects of the victory. The media covered every angle, stories of the brave black veterans who had fought not only on foreign soil but also against a corrupt system back home. Their fight was no longer an isolated struggle, and the public was beginning to understand the gravity of their sacrifice. The law had been a victory, but the fallout from the corruption they'd exposed didn't go away overnight. Despite the bill's passage, the battle against institutional racism in the VA and in broader American society was far from over. The veterans knew this all too well. The system that had once failed them was not going to just roll over and admit defeat. There would still be resistance, underhanded tactics, and challenges ahead. Yet the winds had shifted. They had given the nation something to think about, something to confront. Their actions had lit a spark, and they weren't going to let it die out. At a rally for the new law, Red and Tank stood side by side once more, this time under a banner that read, "Justice for every veteran." They had arranged for survivors from different wars, both black and white, to speak out about the disparities they had endured. It wasn't just about fixing the VA anymore, it was about rethinking the entire system, about making sure every veteran received the care they had fought for regardless of race, background, or history. Red took the microphone first. He was no longer just a soldier with a prosthetic leg or a man with a hardened face. He was now a leader of a movement, and he carried that weight with pride. "You see," Red began, his voice steady, "this fight wasn't just about us. It wasn't just about our brothers and sisters who stood next to us on the front lines. It was about those who never made it back, who are still out there, in the streets, forgotten by the very people they fought for." The crowd fell silent as he paused. "It's about making sure no one ever has to go through what we did. That no veteran has to beg for what they earned. And that every damn person who wore this uniform is treated the same, no matter where they come from or what color their skin is." The audience erupted in applause. Lisa stepped forward next, her presence commanding attention. She spoke about the months of research, the phone calls, the interviews, the sleepless nights. She talked about Doc, about his unshakable belief that their fight was about more than just changing policies, it was about changing a culture. A culture that had long ignored the needs of black veterans and allowed them to suffer in silence. "Doc believed in us," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "He believed in this country and its potential to do right. And because of him we're here today. But don't think this is the end. It's just the beginning." The crowd cheered, chanting Doc's name as Lisa wiped her eyes. In the months that followed, the veterans, Red, Tank, Lisa, Malik, Jay and the others, spent their time visiting VA hospitals, speaking with fellow veterans and checking in on the progress of the law's implementation. But it wasn't easy. The road to rebuilding trust between the government and the black veteran community was long and winding. For years, promises had been made and broken. Many veterans were skeptical that this law would be any different. Some believed it would be just another empty gesture, a way to quiet the protests without addressing the root of the problem. Still, the changes that began to take place were undeniable. New staff was hired to ensure diversity and cultural sensitivity. Training programs for VA personnel were implemented. Public hearings were held regularly to monitor progress and identify areas of improvement. The law had forced the VA to confront its own deep-rooted issues, and while it wasn't perfect, things were changing. The media continued to report on the success stories of veterans who had previously been denied care. Veterans whose cases were reopened and who received the medical attention they had been denied for so long. There were stories of veterans returning home from their service and finding a support system that had once been out of reach. But there was also resistance. Red knew it wouldn't be long before certain powerful people, corporate interests, old VA officials, and others who stood to lose from this overhaul, would push back. And they did. Attempts were made to chip away at the law, to find loopholes, to undermine its impact. The battles were not over. But Red and the others had learned something important. They had learned that sometimes the price of justice was steep, but it was worth paying. They would stay vigilant. As they continued their advocacy, Red found himself being invited to schools, universities, and veteran organizations to speak to younger generations. He spoke not just about their fight but about the future, a future where young people would no longer have to struggle in the same way they had. He emphasized the importance of understanding history, of knowing that the fight for justice was never easy, and that it was always worth it. Tank and Lisa were also involved in mentoring young veterans, showing them how to use their voices to demand the care and respect they deserved. They organized community workshops, taught veterans how to navigate the VA system, and educated them on their rights under the new law. One day, as they sat together in a quiet park, watching a new generation of veterans organize their own march, Red said, "We did good, didn't we?" Tank grinned. "We did." Lisa smiled. "We didn't just change the law. We changed minds. And that's the real victory." But there was still work to do. Red's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Malik. "We have a new fight on our hands." Red raised an eyebrow. "What now?" Lisa leaned in. "The fight never ends, does it?" Red shook his head, smiling grimly. "No, it doesn't." But despite the new challenges that lay ahead, Red felt something different this time. Something stronger. The strength of a brotherhood that had been tested in the flames of war and politics. They were battle-worn, but they were also warriors who had shown the world that the fight for justice wasn't a battle for one, it was a battle for all. And as long as they had breath in their bodies, they would keep fighting. They had learned that the price of truth was high, but the cost of doing nothing was even higher. And no matter what, they would always be willing to pay it.